Hello, you're watching Artist Rap, conversations with musicians, artists, and creative people. We will share stories, concepts, life, and music. We hope these unique insights and topics will enrich your day. I'm your host, Ali Jackson.
It's so funky.
I'm here live and direct. This week is special because I get to see one of my mentors, big brothers, friends, and all around fantastic musician and someone very worthy of doing whatever he'd like to do artistically. I'm speaking of the one and only Craig Handy here live and direct. Craig.
What's up? What's up? How you doing? Can you see me?
You're looking great.
I'm looking gray.
Great.
Great. Okay. Well, I thought you were talking about my new beard, man.
Representing, since we've had this pandemic, we need some leadership. So he at least will have the artistic leadership and the look. By looks, he looks like he knows what's happening.
Well, I appreciate the confidence. The vote of confidence is much appreciated.
Yes, sir. Well, man, there's many questions that I'm sure people would like to know, and the whole format here is to shed light on an artist's life. That from an artist perspective, most of the time, you get asked, so what do you like to do, and then those are cool answers too. But I want to get into more of the perspective of a little bit about your musical background. Maybe you could share with our audience, musically, like what got you into music, how were you inspired?
Ooh, well, that's got to go back to, to the early days of the womb, which I guess, I always like to tell the story of how my sister and I, we both grew up in the same house, right? Like normal family. We were exposed to the same influences, yet we gravitated toward different music styles. So I gravitated to jazz and she gravitated to, more popular contemporary music forms. So the music that I gravitated to was the music that my father loved. And, he had a fairly large record collection. And, my theory is that I was listening to Kind of Blue when I was in my mother's womb. So my earliest memories of hearing the music, it was like an old friend that just come by to hang with me, So I can never remember a time when there wasn't music in my life, and I can never remember a time when there wasn't that that feeling, that kind of like feeling that you get when you listen to music, that it puts you in a place where it just switches you on. You become totally engrossed in the music, and you start to, well, I just started to filter everything through my musical experience, so that was always my safe place. That was always the place where I could, feel like I was most myself, I guess, when I was listening to music. And then when I started playing music, but my influences, just get to your question. My early influences, I don't even know where to begin, bro.
Well, who was pivotal in your development? Like, who put a horn in your hand, and who started you? Like, who got you out the door, out of the gate?
Well, that would be both of my parents. They bought me a saxophone when I was about 12. I think it was my 12th birthday, or even maybe a little before that, actually. Maybe 11 and a half or something like that. But I had taken, but by that time I'd already played guitar for 3 weeks, which doesn't really count. But um, then I had played piano for 6 months, and I had played trombone for one summer. I already had, like, with the piano, I already had a foundation of like the major scales. I knew what they were. I could read the notes. You'd be surprised how far that gets you. So uh, I had that foundation already. But when I heard Dexter Gordon, one day I was riding in the car with my mother, and the radio was on, and the station was K-Jazz that was on in the Bay Area back in those days. Um, and with Dr. Herb Wong and Bob Carlocha and forgetting some of the other DJs. But there was this particular recording I heard. It might have been Fried Bananas, and I heard Dexter playing it, and I was just kind of like, whoa. I just saw two formations of fighter jets pass, five each in each formation, trailing another lone jet trailing them. Never seen that before. Okay, so anyway, that particular moment in my life, his sound hit me, and it like went right through my chest and into my bones and into my soul, and that became for me like the sound of, that was like the soundtrack of my youth, listening to that music, and that's the effect that it had on me. It was so powerful. It was just kind of like a calling. It was just kind of like, I didn't know what it was, and I didn't understand everything about it, but I just knew that I wanted to be around it.
Now, who was, music is relatively social, and what was the social element or construct of, you developing as an artist and a musician, in your, high school, college years?
Yeah, so around the time when I got into high school is when I really started to get around other people that were, like you said, the social part of it, get around other musicians that were like really into jazz. And so that was Berkeley High School, and there was kind of really creative and really talented musicians that came from that school. And there was a legacy because the teacher, Phil Hardaman, who was the teacher at the high school, also had the middle school, and he also had the grammar school. So in the early days of his career, he had the grammar school and the middle school, and then later he had the middle school and the high school. So in effect, if you had Mr. Hardaman when you were, let's say, like 7 or 8 years old, you had him for another 10 years. And he was a great band leader. He was a great teacher. He taught he taught contraband and big band. And his love was Duke Ellington. So his whole focus was to get the musicians to play together and listen to each other when they played, and to basically like form the rudiments of good musicianship through playing, basically big band music, but also small group music, but mostly the big band, because his thing was like, well, if you can't hear what's going on around you, and if you don't leave space for other people to join the conversation, then it's just like somebody who's talking to themselves, basically, in a room full of people. I wonder who I could give you as an example like that. Somebody who just talks all the time and just says the craziest stuff, and it doesn't have any relation to the conversation that's going on. I wonder who that could be. Well, Ali, I'm drawing a blank, man. I can't think of anybody, especially in politics. But anyway, um, so you know what I'm saying? It's like you don't want to be that guy, right? So
You do, or sometimes you do.
well, apparently, it's new rules. But in the old days, it was about listening and about coming together and making music together and balancing the section, listening to your section leader, you know, playing underneath the phrasing of your section leader, and the section leader is playing underneath the phrasing of the lead trumpet. Um, and it was just, you know, something that was kind of drilled into us without us really understanding how deep the concept was as far as like trying to make a performing group. As a result of that training, um, it just created a lot of, it was a fertile ground for a lot of musicians. It was a jumping off point. I mean, look, if you're going to use like Duke Ellington's music as a jumping off point for an educational resource for young students, of course you're going to get like a high level of musicianship out of that situation, right? That's a good, that's a tried and tested and true formula. So um, so a lot of musicians got into their own thing at a very early age, but they were able to play together too because they had a common vocabulary. You see those guys?
No, I couldn't see him, but
That's pretty. I don't know why they're doing maneuvers over the Hudson River. If I should be worried or if I should be celebrating. But
they're chasing down coronavirus.
they're trying to track it down, chase it down. Good luck. Yeah. So Mr. Hardaman was pivotal. You know, first it was my dad, and then Mr. Hardaman, and then all the kids that had access to him that I went to high school with. Uh, we used to listen to music. I mean, I used to do the same thing. You know, it's like I find it very difficult now these days to find the time or find the space in my head to just sit down and listen to music, you know, because there's so many distractions with, you know, with entertainment, with TV, computers, phones, you know, laptops, work, you know, whatever's going on. Remember back in the day, you used to sit down and go over somebody's house and just listen to like, you know, 10 records.
An album. I remember.
You know, I had to get up and go turn the record over. But you would like, before you got up to go turn the record over, you'd be like, wow, did you hear that? You know, you'd be talking about it. Sometimes you just play one song for like an hour. So, you know, there used to be that dialogue between people, musicians, and also just regular, you know, listeners of music. You used to listen to a record, you know, and you paid attention to the formatting of the record because, you know, the producer and the artist, they spent a lot of time trying to figure out what song should come after which song. What song should be the first song on the record, and what song should be the middle song on the record, the last song, so forth and so on. So there was just a lot more craft involved in music production. It wasn't like a one-off like on YouTube or iTunes or, you know, whatever, where you just play one song and you go to the next one just because whatever you feel like it. It was curated, you know. There was a lot more craft involved in the art of the production of the music. But anyway, that was, you know, that was just an important part of my my what was in my scope, you know, at that time. So
what contemporaries or you know, classmates, friends, musicians that are either closer to your age that inspired you to
well, that would be Benny Green on piano, you know, not the trombone player, but the pianist is about my age. He's a year behind me, I think, in high school. Um, you know, Benny Green from Berkeley, California, that piano player, guy with the good hair. You know what I'm talking about, right?
obviously, yeah, of course.
So, Benny Green, Peter Applebaum, who had a band called the Hieroglyphics out in California, and actually out here too. Peter's super talented. You know, I think his first instrument was drums when he was 3, and then he, started playing piano, and then he basically learned how to play probably every instrument. But his forte was piano, drums, and the reed instruments, saxophones. And he's playing with Daphnis Prieto currently. He's playing tenor saxophone with Daphnis right now, and he's also got his own projects going. Rodney Franklin, the keyboardist who lives in LA, became a studio musician out there. Tony St. James, who's, I think his name that he was born with was Tony Williams, I think, and he changed it to St. James because there's 2 drummers with the Tony Williams name. It wasn't going to work out too well, so I think. And then let's see, man, there's so many people. Peck Allmond, who plays trumpet and saxophones. He lives in Brooklyn. Peter lives in Brooklyn now too. Stephen Bernstein, trumpet player and producer, has worked on, lots of different kinds of music with Henry Threadgill and Hal Warren.
These are people that inspired you, that came up in the Berkeley area when.
Yeah. The thing was that everybody could agree that that, and even everybody went in different directions, but everybody could agree what great musicianship was, because in learning and studying, musicians that had come up in the big band era, under Duke Ellington or Fletcher Henderson or Billy Eckstine, everybody could agree that these were the qualities that you needed to have to be a good musician, like good basic qualities for good basic musicianship. You needed to have a curriculum, compulsory set of things that everybody could agree that was if you can do these 10 things, then it means that you have basic musicianship covered. So and even today, everybody has gone lots of different directions. Not everybody went into the post bop, jazz or whatever monikers that are thrown onto people that play in a certain style. Everybody went into different directions, but they all possess the qualities of good musicianship from an early age. I'm trying to think of some other cats. There's some cats that actually stopped playing music. There's a guy that nobody will ever hear of. His name was Herbert Sneed. Herbert Sneed was one of the best lead trumpet players I've ever heard in my entire life to this day. That high school that I went to won every competition that we traveled to in California and Nevada. We didn't understand it, but it was just the bar was set so high for us that when I went to North Texas State in Texas later, I was I listened to all 13 lab bands that they had, and I was like, yeah, these guys are okay, but man, my high school band sounds better than even the top bands here, because we had been playing together for a long time, and there was just more musicality in the band, so it was a very good experience to have.
That's awesome. Give me a brief road story. You have a road story. I'd love some sounds from the road.
Sounds from the road. Well, I got to tell you one story. One of my favorite stories is a story that Roy Haynes told me when I played with Roy, because I played with Roy for 8 years, and Roy played with he played with everybody. He played with Dinah Washington, Sarah Vaughan, Coleman Hawkins, Charlie Parker, played with Monk and John Coltrane and a host of people. Anyway, so Roy had lots of stories. And one of the stories that Roy told me, he says he was playing with Coleman Hawkins in DC somewhere, at a club in DC. And The next night they had, the next day they had to travel to Boston. They had to drive 8 hours. You know, back then probably even longer because you know the highway and what the cars were capable of doing in the highways, the way that it was designed back then. So they had to spend like 9 or 10 hours driving to Boston the next day. So they were driving to Boston the next day to go play. And Royce, somebody said, I'm getting hungry. They were about halfway. And then Roy said, let's stop and eat. And Roy said, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that. And so they pulled over, they stopped somewhere, they got some food to eat. One thing, you know, they kind of dilly-dallied. You know, back then there was a certain thing that certain musicians used to be involved with. And they went to the restroom and they did that thing that they used to do. And then, of course, an hour went by and they lost, you know, another hour and a half of time waiting for everybody to kind of like straighten up so they could get back and get back on the road again. They got to the club late and they started performing. And then after the gig, the club owner came to Coleman Hawkins and he says, here's your money. I'm docking you, you know, X amount of dollars because you guys got here late, started late. Coleman was like, all right. He couldn't really say anything because, you know, the club owner was correct. And then, so Coleman paid everybody, and then he went to Roy, and he says, here's your money. I'm docking you because you're the one that suggested that we stop to eat for lunch.
Oh, man.
You can't make that kind of story up.
That's brutal.
It's brutal, man. It's like, really?
That's brutal. Wow.
But I mean, you know, I mean, you and I were both raised in the era of like, you know, where if you did something wrong, you got ass whooping, right? So, I mean, and I know we've talked about this before, you know, and particularly, and I have a friend who's a defense lawyer in Los Angeles, and he just defended a 64-year-old brother who was a teacher, guitar player and arranger, music teacher, who kind of went off on a student who was calling him the N-word and goading him for like, I don't know, taunting him for like a long time in the classroom, full of students, threw a basketball at him, assaulted him. Finally, he kind of lost it and he went off and he just started, you know, whooping his kids behind. And, you know, fortunately, there were a lot of, you know, it wasn't like a clear-cut case, and there were a lot of mitigating circumstances. And my friend was actually able to get him cleared of all charges. And the teacher was adamant. He says, no, I'm not taking any deals. He says, I'm either cleared of all charges or I'm doing, you know, whatever they throw at me. Because, you know, I've been in this business for over 30 years. You know, it's my reputation, it's my pension, everything is tied up into it. So I want to clear my name, you know. And he won. And apparently, like a lot of teachers around the country, you know, raised funds through a GoFundMe campaign to help him. And but I mean, we talked about this kind of thing. It's like, you know, when you used to play with the older cats, it was like another story I'll tell you real quick before I finish that one. I was in Paris back in the 80s with Roy Haynes, and Roy had some rules, you know, like some basic rules, like being in the band, like Umaña, like, you know, like anybody does. So one of Roy's rules was that if you don't know the melody of the song, when I call the song, just say, I don't know it, and then go learn it. So it was my first gig. It might have been like one of my very first gigs with Roy. And we had already played like one set and, you know, it went really well. Everybody in the club was happy, you know, everybody in the band was happy. We were all having a great time. But he called this song that I knew 98.9% of the melody. But when it got to the bridge, there was this one little part, and I didn't know if it went up or went down. But, you know, I figured well, I'll make it melodic. So it'll, whether it goes up or goes down a whole step, or either be a third away, it'll still be in the harmony of the chord and the melody. So I made that choice and I went the wrong way. And so Roy, so Kikoski, Dave Kikoski was the piano player. So Kikoski said, if Roy does this on the tom-tom, if he rubs his hand and you hear the tom, that means we're taking the song out, no solos. We're taking, like, you going in, going right out. So, and he told me, he says, if you don't know the melody, pass, because that'll happen. So I made that choice, made the wrong choice, and then after we finished the melody on the last day, we took the song out. Roy said, I got it. And I didn't hear him, and because he was kind of annoyed, and he was like, you know how you drummers do when you start like tuning the drums when you don't really have to tune the drums? He took the keys, he was fiddling with the drums. And I was like, he said, what? He said, what? He says, and he said, I got it. Get the F off the stage. And I was like, oh, snap. He is pissed. So, and he said, everybody get the F off the stage. He got, so myself, Ed Howard, Dave Kikoski, we all had to leave the stage. We got off the stage, and he proceeded to play a 22-minute drum solo that brought the house down. And people were going crazy. And I was like, oh, man. Not only did I mess up the melody, get my friends in trouble, get the rest of the band, like, kicked off the bandstand. Now he has played the drum solo from life that I have to go back up and then, follow that, We have to go back up and follow that performance when he just laid down. It's like, man, I just want to put my saxophone case, go to the bar, have a drink, go to the hotel, go sleep. Think about my life, But, Roy laid it down, and it was like, okay, there's the bar, sink or swim, and it's like, wow, I'm like 60 feet underwater. I'm not sure if I can make it back to the surface again. It's those kinds of experiences that, forge you in the crucible, right? So getting back to the story about that teacher who was defended by my friend, we live in a time when, and I have lots of friends that are teachers. I mean, yourself included. It's like you can't really talk to the students the way you need to talk to them in order to tell them what this music really means and the importance,
or what life really means.
Well, what life really means, but also like, how much easier, coronavirus aside, how much easier we've had it, in the last 20, 30 years, because the people that came before us laid down their lives literally every time they went into a club. They didn't know if they were going to get beat up. They didn't know if they were going to get, paid. They didn't know if they were going to eat that night. Where they were going to stay when they got into town. Maybe they didn't, Another story I remember hearing about Sarah Vaughan, back in 1961, I believe it was. There's a hotel in San Francisco called the Fairmont Hotel, and it's owned by the Swig family. And I met it's Ben and Stephen Swig, and it's like one is the father and one is the son. I can't remember, but I met the son, and he told me this story. He was working in the hotel in 1961, and Sarah Vaughan came in, and she was going to perform there for, let's say, a week at the Fairmont room, at the Fairmont Hotel, and I forget the name of the room. But anyway, so she walks in, she checks in, she asks the desk person, she says, where am I staying at? And they were like, excuse me? And she says, well, I know that, she didn't say this, but she didn't say, because I'm Black, that I'm not allowed to stay in the hotel. But she said, I know the musicians are often not allowed to stay, in the same hotel they're performing at. She said, I'm just curious where I'm staying at. And the desk person said, well, your room number is thus and such, and you stand here. And she said, no, you don't understand. I was like, where am I going to sleep tonight? And young Swig understood immediately, hearing this much of the conversation, what was going on. And he took her aside and he explained to her, he says, no, in this hotel, all musicians, regardless of your skin color, stay in the same hotel that you're performing at. You stay here. We give you a room, we're feeding you, we're taking care of you. He said she broke down and cried.
And that's Sarah Vaughan?
Yep. 1961.
Wow.
This shit is real, bro. You know what I'm saying? So that's why, it's important to be able to teach those kinds of lessons and have people that are trying to understand or trying to study this music, understand that component of it. Because a lot of this music is protest music, a lot of this music is music that's born out of being oppressed, So you can't take part, it's like taking the pepperoni off the pizza and just eating that. That's great. You're getting the protein, but you're not getting the carbs. You got to eat, if you're going to eat a meal, eat the whole meal, get the vegetables, get the protein, get the whole thing. Don't just like take a piece of it, because then it's not the art form anymore. It's not the complete picture of the art form anymore.
Well, you brought up a very interesting point, and I'll just comment on it. Today, if you go back 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I think it stopped probably 20 years ago, definitely, like sputtered out, hit a ceiling, or it was limited. It's about, it's a big corporate machine, and generally for young people, it's you selling them an experience. Mm-hmm. And it's about like, did they have a good experience? About like, customer satisfaction, as opposed to, our education. No one cared about how you felt about it. This is kind of the experience. You had to sort out your own, how you dealt with the experience. But it wasn't like you got a customer survey card and said, oh yeah, check box, this check box, this check box. Most of the time it was, if you had a thick enough skin to survive, to be good, and what was required to be really good. It's like, getting called by Roy Haynes is like kind of like that's a graduation, right, in itself, to be good enough to be in someone's band like that, or to be good enough to be in, Lionel Hampton's band, or any big band, or any band of somebody of proven stature and ability that's been doing it for their entire life, to be acknowledged by them, and to also to be invited on the bandstand with them. That is the beacon of being successful. Didn't matter what the gig paid. It was more artistic acceptance, basically.
Peer review, right? Yeah. That's been one of the most significant markers and indications of progress throughout this music.
Well, peer review in a certain era, you can't, if you do it now, it'd be a lot of disappointment. It came from, yeah.
It meant something. Now people will do it to put a name in the band, or to put somebody, like a Formula One team, to bring some money into the band or something like that. There's other reasons people do it. Back then, it was all about the music. And that wasn't.
Yeah, I was going to say, elaborate on that, because where do you feel like these are a couple of things I wanted to ask you. Like, what do you feel about the state of music today?
Well, there's still a lot of great music being produced, being recorded, being written. I feel I guess there's many different sides to it, but I feel like the two sides to it that I'm kind of stuck on is one that the the criteria for greatness has been sort of taken off the board.
Yeah, well, it's been demolished.
Okay, that's a little bit, I was trying to be nice, but
No,
yeah,
it's been demolished because you have people that aren't that don't have, how can I say, they don't have the resume to define what is greatness in something. It's only about your lowest common denominator. It's like if I start talking about food and cuisine and McDonald's is my benchmark, then it's like, well, what are we talking about? So yeah. I'm sorry.
Well, no, but that's one side of it. So that creates a whole, downstream of that problem, that creates a whole lot of issues, right? And the other stream that that I'm stuck on is and this is part of the problem, is that there are so many other distractions that are out there that are in our way that keep us from basically, it's like going to the museum, right? You go down to the museum, you sit down, you look at a painting for 10 or 15 minutes. Now, then it was, you go to the museum, you look at a painting for 1 minute, and you try to see the whole, you try to see, instead of just staying in one wing of the museum for like an hour or two, you try to see the whole museum in the same amount of time. Then it was like, you go to the museum, you breeze through, you just kind of like glance at the paintings, like while you're like, making a video about yourself going to the museum, looking at the paintings and talking about the paintings, but like, boom, you're out like in 15 minutes. Then now it's like, you don't even bother going to the museum. You just kind of, you Google like, what is in the museum, and you do something related to that, So we're getting farther and further and further away from the kernel, of the thing. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier about like sitting down and listening to an entire album.
Well, I would make a challenge. That's one of my challenges for, I would say, people under the age of 40. I mean, almost basically anyone, especially from the age range of 35. But I say, how many people, and especially for musicians. So this is definitely for musicians. How many times a week do you spend on uninterrupted listening? Mm-hmm. So for a musician, I forget who says this, but they say God created humans with 2 ears and 1 mouth to listen twice as much as you speak.
I like that one. I never heard it.
Yeah. So as developing musicians, or musicians in the shed, or musicians like trying to find their artistic voice, you should be listening to a lot of music, and it's the intensity of the listening. It's never the perspective of, oh, I listen to all of this music. You have access. So in some ways, goes back to the theory that you talked about earlier, so many distractions. To be a great musician or artist, you need no distractions. Actually, you need a lot of solitude. It's very lonely. That's what people don't understand. They see you on a bandstand on a stage, but they know how many hours you spend alone with your instrument, and how many hours you spent, or just for us, I can go back to an experience in the late 90s, where we were on the road, and every day we got up, we had breakfast, or sometimes missed breakfast, because we were up all night writing music and composing collectively, like together. Oh man, here, I got this idea. This is a melody here. It's like, well, what about these changes? Or so the creative process is, that's rare actually. So that kind of workshopping and being with artists in a compositional thing, because our time, look at today, everyone is fast, ready, like go on to the next one. So there's no quote unquote quality control. There's no, we need more time with this. This is not right.
Well, it's part of a shift that's happening in society. Um,
You said
it doesn't
that's
happen.
happening or that's happened.
Well, but it's happening. It's still going on. I mean, it's active. It's active right now. It's been happening, but it's active right now. And the other day, I was thinking about it in terms of like looking at something on Instagram, right, or YouTube, or I don't remember what it was. But now that the coronavirus is here, it's I've spent a lot more time on piano writing, but also I spent a lot more time like just trying to stay in touch with friends, and that puts you, in the vicinity of the phone, which then can suck 6 hours away like that, because it's like a lot of, you and I both know a lot of people around the world, because we've been touring all over the world for, most of our lives. And to get in touch with those people, and then people start sending you things, and you like look at a video, and then you read an article, and then pretty soon it's like dinner time, So, right. So, but anyway, I was looking at this post that somebody had put on, and it was actually part of a longer post that somebody had put on a few days ago, or a few days earlier. And they had rebranded it basically. And instead of it being like, a 3-minute performance of something, which, by old standards is like, nothing, right? But today, if you're like looking at one thing for 3 minutes on the internet, that's like, wow, that's like a long time. Somebody had put on like a 10-second or 15 or 20-second version of it. And that 20-second version of it had thousands of hits, whereas the original 3-minute post had hundreds of hits. And they just rebranded it and said, and they took one little tiny piece of it, and they said, when somebody did something like this, like put in whatever adjective you want to use to describe it, but then it was like, oh, it's exciting. It's like 15 seconds, I got to, oh, wow, it was great. Okay, it was the next thing. Oh, and that had all the hits on it. That's the way, that's there's some kind of scientific term for what happens in the brain when that happens. And I forget what that term they use is, but basically it's just like you eating all the sugar before you even eat the meal. You forgo the meal, just eat the sugar. Don't put the sugar on the cereal. Just forget the cereal, just eat the sugar. That's basically what it is, and that's where we're at right now. So that's the second part that I'm kind of hung up on, because I'm like, I don't know how to adjust to that. You want to stay current, and you want to stay out there, and you want to get your brand out there, and you want to do that thing, but you're also like, do I really want to do this? Because
do you want, because it's fleeting. What I recognize, that's the one thing I recognize about music or artistic development. It's a choice. And I think for many of us on this is artist rap. It's, can you stay the course of your belief in your development? Because development, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's hard to go against it being linear, or modular. You build on the last thing that you did, or you build and you're constantly building information. But if you just go to the shiny thing, I mean, it has nothing to do with your artistic depth. Like, no one's looking beyond it. It's like recognizing talent, like with young musicians or their ability to play. It's like in 4 bars, you can tell if somebody can play or not, or like if they have something, like either their sound or their approach, or they're not playing,
right,
or their level of intelligence. And so I feel for musicians, there's a quotient. Like, just because you can get around your instrument doesn't mean that you are going to be a great artist or musician. Like, that's one aspect. Like, guys that can play all this stuff. Like, definitely for drummers, your drummers all the time have a lot of velocity, no sound on the drums. Like, you have no sound on the instrument, but you're playing all this stuff, so people are like amazed. Wow, this guy's, and that's one common thing. That's like number one. See, no one's talking about how much music or thoughtful or how much arranging or knowledge of composition or arranging or orchestration that goes into what makes music good, or the components. So because the threshold, and I know maybe for you, you got a couple of years on me. When you were young, your audience was more educated. So if you were sad, they would be like, "You're sad. You need a little more practice." Or, you know, if it was your friends or family, they'd be like, they say something like that. But if it was cats on the street, man, you're sad. Get off the bandstand. Just your story with Roy Haynes. He stopped and took the whole band off the bandstand because you messed up one piece, one part of the melody on the bridge, let alone people that are butchering melodies all over the place. They don't even play standards anymore. I think so. Like, what are we talking about? And I know that feeling. I've been, not by any stretch of the imagination, am I Roy Haynes or have his, level of history, but I've been that way on gigs, on bandstands, when people mess up melodies and they don't care. And it's the apathy of not caring about the music. And I think for real artists, it's like the care. I remember we would rehearse I was like, well, how long is rehearsal? Is it from 3 to 6 or 3 to 8? It's like, no, it's till whenever the music sounds right. And if it don't sound right, we're not playing that.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's what do you do with an audience that's not educated, that's not informed like that? How do you reach them? How do you develop them? How do you bring them along for the journey?
How did Bach deal with it? How did J.S. Bach deal with that, or Beethoven, when none of their stuff got played? They were like, "Yeah, what is this?" It's like if you're waiting for artists to be led by listeners. I mean, we're in a sad state of affairs. It's like us going to the doctor telling them what we want. It's like the doctor tells you, you don't tell the doctor.
True, but you want to be able to put food on the table too, though.
I hate to break it to you. You can dumb it down as much as you want. Music has been marginalized. I just hate to say it. And if it's not like cookie, like you say, if it's not just sugar, no cereal, just the sugar. And what color is the sugar, like exploding? Like the sugar, like doing crazy. It has nothing to do with the substance of what the art is about. I mean, I think now it has to be subsidized if you really want to do art, because the world as it is, with all the distractions, because you have to add all the other variables. We're not just talking about, and that's why the level of listening and the demand for quality of things is because our world is just inundated with so much stuff. So to sit down and just, play a song, to listen to a ballad completely and like hear the expression of emotion, you have to be in a quiet place. Our world is far from a quiet place. Or to take the time to be in a quiet place. How about that?
Time. Everybody's got, 5 hours to look at 30 seconds worth of content, but nobody's got, 1 hour to look at, one piece of, like, listen to one album or listen to something all the way through. It's a different time, So,
yeah, I want you to please elaborate on what you were saying, like what that balance is and the tipping point, and as an artist, where you are with that. Like how are you bridging that void? Or
Bird could play one chorus and pretty much say all of it in one chorus. He didn't need 15 choruses, right? There's an art form, and Shakespeare too. There's an art form to saying the right thing at the right time, and it's just a perfect little summation in a time capsule that's true, no matter whether it was 500 years ago, yesterday, or tomorrow, right? So there is some value to the internet in that way, if you can figure out how to basically pimp yourself. You know what I'm saying? So you don't necessarily have to throw your values, in the washing machine and dilute them out. Um, you keep doing what you've been doing, and you try to get better at that as well at the same time. But you also have to be clever about how you put it out there. You know, so then you can pimp yourself. You can say, you can take 15 seconds of your drum solo or your song or your thing, your video, and put it on there and put a cute caption on it. And maybe that'll be the next 100,000 hit,
Packages in sugar, cute, packaged in refined sugars.
And then the people that are hip, they'll be like, oh, that's hip, that's cool. And then they'll get into it and they'll be like, oh, wait a minute, this is a lot more layered than I thought it was. Maybe this is deeper, And the people who don't get it will just keep bouncing along like the rock that skips along the top of the water, to the other side of the bank. But it allows you to keep doing what you're doing, to keep moving forward and to keep developing. You just have to learn a new language along the way.
Yes, absolutely.
Easier said than done, and also for me, it's like the last thing I want to do. I'd rather do the dishes first. You know what I mean? So it's not easy, but that's the world we live in. If you want to play in that world, if you want to live in that, let's say in that pond, you want to live in that. If you want to be in it, then you got to be of it in that way, But you and I are never going to be able to just become like, turn off that part of our brain that says, I call bullshit. You know what I'm saying? We're never going to be able to do that because that's not who we are. So we're going to keep developing as artists and as people, and we're going to keep addressing the issues that we think need to be addressed, And I think there's a way for it to work, but I don't disagree with you about subsidizing, the art form. Obviously, that's what's been going on in Europe for years and decades and generations. And that's how they were able to keep their art alive, their culture alive, across a broad spectrum, not just music. But America's a long way from that, hopefully in the next, sometime between now and January, February, when we go back to the polls, we'll have learned a lot, and we'll be reflecting all of this time that we've spent indoors, and we'll be going like, well, maybe we should make a change. Maybe we should do something differently. Maybe we should get back to basics. Maybe we should leave stupid, in the car, and maybe there will be some way to incorporate a different mindset moving forward, where people will be able to have space and have room for these ideas and these concepts that we're talking about, and not just be like, instant gratification. I know it's a big ask. But, there's always a way to do it, There's always a way. If you look back on things and you say, well, so-and-so engineered themselves, positioned themselves in such a way that they got their message out there. And you look back at successful movements, like, you look back at Barack Obama's, both of his campaigns, for president. He did things just a little bit differently, and enough of that to actually cross over and get into the successful column. Because honestly, I never thought in my lifetime I'd see a man that had brown skin that would be president. I don't know about you, but I would have sworn a stack of Bibles that it would never happen in my lifetime. But he was able to do it, though. So that gives me hope, because I think that there's always a way. You got to be slick, you got to be smart, and you got to be able to have, obviously you have to have something to offer that's worthwhile. But
or not.
Well, I mean, a lot of people don't have anything to offer, and they're like, they're part of the million view, YouTube club, because they're just dropping watermelons off the towers. right? And filming it.
Well, actually, it is something to offer. It's just like maybe sometimes you could call it stupidity or
It's a major distraction. It's like a big distraction, you know. And it's like the bigger the distraction, the more wow you get, you know. I feel like that's, you know, the case of Agent Orange. He's like one large distraction, and it's just kind of like, what the huh, you know. And so it's almost like it's kind of apropos for our time, you know, because. But I think I'm going to make a prediction and say that you know, at least some of those cards in that house are falling down right now, because as one of his own party said, in a Republican who writes for the Atlantic, he says you know, the curtain's been pulled back, you know, and people are really getting a look at the guy behind the curtain pulling the levers, and you know, the dude is not the smartest dude in the room, you know, kind of the inverse.
well, it's before we go on. I want you to talk a little bit about your music philosophy, like you know your artistic philosophy. Can you share a little
I'm
bit?
glad you asked that. So the way it used to be was that when I was younger, I was you know, I don't want to say I was an angry young black man, but I definitely had some some leftover um, frustration from, you know, the way I had seen people be treated in this country, you know, and not just brown people, but all people, you know, in this country. You know, anybody that's not part of the, you know, $1 million club. Um, so a lot of my need to perform and play came from a place of wanting to protest, you know, wanting to comment on that. And I didn't do it in a straightforward way, like saying that I need to address an issue. It was just something in me that was just fomenting, and I wasn't able to really put my finger on it, but it was driving me, you know. So then, more recently, I've had a shift in my life where it's become more focused. And so I wrote a suite the um, for the anti-trafficking movement, you know, human trafficking. I wrote a suite about that because a friend of mine has a foundation that helps people that have been trafficked get out of being trafficked and helps them reconnect to their emotions using music, using art, using dance, you know, making, you know, handicrafts, making, you know, drawing, painting, all kinds of things. But what they would fall into the category of nonverbal therapy, and it's been studied and over the last 20 years or so, and nonverbal therapy is one of the more successful kinds of therapy, because talk therapy, as we all know, is like going to a shrink. You could be in therapy for 25, 30, 40 years and still have all the same issues that you have. And you might understand them intellectually, but you might not be in a better place to actually deal with them and deploy some kind of meaningful strategies to deal with them. But in expressing yourself, like going into a garden and planting a beautiful garden, or planting flowers, or drawing, or writing music, or singing, or dancing, those are things that actually connect you to your emotions on a very deep level, allow you to express yourself, allow you to be at peace with who you are, where you are, and what you are, and to see yourself clearly and say, well, I can choose what I want in my life, right? I don't have to be this way or that way. I can choose to do something else. I can choose to move. I can choose to have different people in my life. I can choose. I have choices. It gives you agency. So it's a very important thing to understand that. And to that effect, you know, and so I'm using the music that I'm writing now more pointedly and more focused to target things that I want to talk about. So one of the things I want to talk about, bring to the forefront, is the conversation about trafficking, because trafficking is a huge problem. It's been a huge problem, but it's getting bigger. It's actually growing, not only in this country, but around the world. There's an estimated 45 million people that are enslaved around the world through trafficking, whether they're, whether it's labor trafficking, whether they're like having to be domestics inside of a house, whether it's sex trafficking, whether it's like people that are, migrant workers, whatever it is. It's like there's millions and millions of people around the world. And in this country, it's happening too. And in this country, there's a bigger problem with sex trafficking than most of us realize. Myself, I'm learning about it all the time. In the last 3 years, I've been learning a lot about it through my friend's foundation and having conversations with her about it. She's on the front line, So there's a lot of power in being able to express yourself in that way. For me personally, and it's very gratifying to give myself to a cause and to try to bring more awareness about an issue, through the music.
Can you go into a little bit about how you constructed this piece and like the themes that you used that were relative or the your concept around connecting certain topics with the music and your
the way I started doing it was I tried to put myself in the shoes of somebody who was being trafficked and how they might feel about the situation. And what was happening was that at the same time, I was talking to my friend on the phone for like 2 hours every couple of days. Sometimes we would talk for 5 hours. I mean, like in 1 month, we must have talked for like, I don't know how many hours, like well over 30 or 40 hours, And because I was hearing all these stories and because I was actually getting to meet some of these people and understand the mechanisms that are in place to control the people, I would wake up with melodies in my head. Sometimes I would wake up with a melody screaming at me. Sometimes I would wake up with a melody that was crying, that was just like, it was getting into me. It was going into my bones and it was just coming up. And I'd wake up after 3 or 4 hours of sleep, and I'd have to go write something because that's what I was hearing at that particular moment. So I didn't have like a real, sort of outline to follow or particular sort of, it was just coming to me. Later on, I started organizing it in terms of just in terms of the way that people are targeted for trafficking. So let's say somebody runs away from home and takes a bus to a town, to a bigger city, right? And at the bus stop, you ever notice sketchy people that hang around the bus stop? Those people are some of the people that might be involved in, connecting a runaway with, like the middleman, so to speak, right? So that's, one way. I mean, obviously there's millions or thousands of ways that people run into these kinds of situations. I mean, it can be a situation where, a guy is becomes romantically involved with a woman, and then one day he says we're going to a party, and she becomes the entertainment, and she's trapped for any number of reasons. Maybe she's threatened, maybe she's in love with the guy and just can't say no to him, or so there's lots of different ways and that people can become involved. So the suite runs from the way that people can get entrapped into situations where they become trafficked, and then in the middle of it, what they're dealing with, the kinds of emotions that they're feeling, and the fact that mainly they really have to push their emotions down, because you cannot be in your feelings when you're being, when you're being oppressed like that, because you're forced to work all the time.
I mean,
but you don't have time.
Sounds like modern day slavery. Sounds like
But that's exactly what it is, though. I mean, it's we tend to think of these things that are things that happened in the past and that we've moved forward and we don't do these kinds of things anymore. And maybe they happen in some undeveloped countries far away from us, but they're right here. They're right with us. They're right around the corner from us. If you live in a major city, it's going on in your city, without a doubt. Um, and then there's the liberation. So the suite is actually called Liberation Journey. And at the end of it, it's to become liberated from your enslavers, but also to understand that. And I mean, it's very, because you are liberated physically doesn't mean that you are actually liberated emotionally. You're always going to be dealing with that. You're always going to have some kind of PTSD that brings up, because you show people an image of a wedding, and some people might say, I love weddings, it's like my favorite, thing to go to and be at, and blah, blah, this, and the other. Another person would be like, wow, that's where I met the person that got me involved with being, trafficked. You know what I mean? So it's like the same thing, which can be joy for one person, can be absolute horror for somebody else. So there's, I'm in a place now in my life where nothing is as it seemed before. Nothing. I don't see. I mean, I still love to laugh, and I love to be silly and joke around. But at the same time, I realize that that there's a lot of harm that goes on as well, and I can't be oblivious to the pain that people suffer, and not do something about it. I used to feel it when I was younger, but I didn't understand it. Now I understand it more, and so now I have a way to, and I have agency to deal with it too, because I can use my music to address the issue and to bring greater awareness to it. And even if it's only to two people on the planet, to go, aha, I'm going to make something of that. I'll donate $100,000 to this foundation, or I'll donate $10 to that foundation, or I'll go volunteer my time over here. It's just the energy of actually doing that, of giving, has created more joy in my life recently than anything else that I can think of. So, it's a kind of a corny thing. It's a cliche, but they say that giving is or they say giving is I forgot the cliche. There's a saying in there, something about giving bringing more satisfaction or more joy to somebody than receiving.
It's always better to give than to receive.
Sometimes it's good to receive too. But absolutely. I mean, I don't know if it's better, but it's definitely it's very gratifying, and it's amazing how much support there is out there. It's like you take one step forward, the universe takes another step towards you, and you get closer to where you want to be, on your journey, on your particular path. And it's true. And man, we've received so much support since writing this week. There's a lot of people that are, before the virus hit, that have shown up in significant ways, to support this initiative. So starting to understand what the responsibilities that are involved with having a platform, and also being given the means to reach people, and we've all been gifted this, everybody that plays music in a professional capacity, everybody has the ability to reach people. Anybody that gets a microphone in their hand in front of 5 people has the power and the responsibility that comes with it, to do something. It doesn't have to be. I mean, it could be. I mean, the subject matter can be anything. It changes from person to person, but it's just something that I felt very strongly with, because I have African ancestry and I have American American indigenous ancestry as well, and both of those bloodlines have been oppressed and decimated in this country. So it's something I feel personally very connected to as well, because I feel like it's part of who I am. It's part of who I am.
Yeah. Yes, sir. And I'm sure you can give us some I'll get information on those organizations and everything at the end of our talk. Can you have an instrument near you? I want you just to play whatever you want, like briefly, like 15 seconds.
15 seconds. Okay. Let me walk over to my piano. Let's see if my piano is talking to me today. It's a little out of tune, so you'll have to forgive me. It's been a while since the tuner's been here, and now that the virus has infected the whole country, piano tuners are in short supply. Let's see. Let's see how to do this. All right, can you see me?
Yeah.
I messed up the ending, but anyway, that's one of the pieces of the suite. So it's one of those pieces that I woke up. It was like screaming at me when I woke up in the morning, and I was like, after 4 or 5 hours of sleep, I was like, oh, I gotta write that down.
Put the fridge on it. Put the fridgie on it.
Put the fridge up on it. Yeah, that one is very fruitful with refrigeratedness.
Oh no, that's beautiful, man. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. Well, it's good to know that things are still moving forward, even though we're not we're not we're not inside for nothing.
No, no, no. I mean, and there's always a silver lining, right? I mean, as messed up as this situation is for us, not being able to go out and perform and actually make a living, it forces you to, forces us to take a harder look, a longer look, it forces us to reconfigure. And that's always a good thing too, because, you end up getting rid of stuff that you don't need, even if it's up here, maybe, I got closets full of stuff I don't need too, that I need to donate or get rid of. But that can happen as well because I got time now. But you have time to think about the things that you don't need up here as well. So it can refocus you. You can use this time to refocus and to get to things that you been wanting to do or things that you've been things that just things you've been thinking about for a long time. I'm sure everybody's got things that they thought, it's like, well, I'll get to that maybe in the next 5 years when I got more time or this, or, when I retire or do that or the other, it's like, all right, now is the time. That's, like Bird said, now is the time.
Yeah. Always now is the time. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add or to, share before we conclude our talk?
Just, stay positive. It's okay to get down, but, get back up. Reconfigure, I'll tell you something. When this first started, I was overwhelmed because I didn't think that I'd be able to deal with going outside, going to the store, putting a mask on, putting gloves on, making sure that I didn't touch my face, I was paranoid to go outside. It was like it was like 2 or 3 days, and I was like just like completely freaked out. Because there was like the unknown. It's like the virus is out there. It's like, what do you do? How are you supposed to behave? You all this information is coming since then, but we still don't really know how this thing operates. We don't know if we can get it again. If you get it once, can you get it again? It's like there's still so many questions. So, but just it's like tying your shoes, right? You learn to do that when you're like 4 or 5, 6 years old, whatever. It's hardwired into your brain. Like falling off a bike, you'll never forget how to tie your shoes, right? Once you learn, you do it for 10, 15, 20, 60 years, it's a wrap. You got it. You can do it in your sleep. But when you learn something new, it's more difficult because you're actually creating a new neural pathway in your brain. So it's like the difference between walking down a paved street and chopping your way through the jungle with a machete and making a new path, right? But once you, figure out a couple of days of like getting your chops back together, which one to hit on the upstroke, which one to hit on the downstroke, after a while, you can do it. So it's just, it just reminded me of like not to be afraid of doing things that are difficult, because with time they become easier, and it's important to keep your brain developing, even as we get older, to force yourself to do things that are difficult for you, because that means that's the jungle. You gotta chop through it. You gotta make a pathway through it, and that's an important thing to do as you get older. So start learning new stuff all the time, because and that's why you sit at the piano. You know the deal. It's like you can fascinate yourself with all kinds of stuff that's hard and difficult and fascinating and really interesting for hours, because there's so much to learn, when you sit down on an instrument, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know, just don't be afraid to do things that are difficult, because they will get easier, I guess that's what I'm telling myself.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Great handy. Top shelf.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me, man. I appreciate it. Good to talk to you.
My pleasure. Our pleasure. Thank you.